Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested by a viewer. Thanks to Noah Botman for this one. Why is tribal a card type rather than being a supertype? Okay, so that's the question. And in order to answer this question, we're going to have to dig really deep into exactly what a card type, subtype, and supertype are supposed to be. So that's as good of a place as any to start out our discussion. So let's talk a little bit about that. First of all, what are the definitions for these kinds of terms? So first of all, a card type is basically exactly what it says on the tin. It tells you what type of card that you're dealing with. That's important because sorceries work different from stuff like creatures and lands. Those are all examples of card types. Now, card subtypes is also pretty self-explanatory. It tells you what kind of sorcery or artifact or land that you're dealing with. And card supertypes, well, they function kind of similarly to card types, only a little bit more meta. They basically function as tags that other cards or rules can use to identify whether something does or does not belong to a certain type of an effect. And the thing that makes supertypes kind of special is that they're more overarching. So you can have a supertype, and that basically tells you a characteristic that is something that any kind of card could have. So any kind of card could be legendary or snow. So now that we've got that sorted out, let's take a look at an example card and kind of identify where the card types, subtypes, and supertypes are on the type line. So if you see here, you've got an example, and you can see that this is a legendary snow creature. So as we discussed before, legendary and snow would be examples of supertypes, and creature would be an example of a card type, and then the card subtypes happen after the long dash. And so that's how you would be able to identify these on an example magic card. Okay, so what's the problem? And the issue is that card types and card subtypes are correlated. And that's the reason why, for example, if you have a blood moon, then your dryad arbor is not going to be a forest anymore, but a mountain, but it will still be a dryad. So this leads us to this kind of rule that we have in Magic, which is that you cannot have subtypes if you don't also have the corresponding card type. And this is a really important rule, and we've worked with this rule for a really long time, and it makes really intuitive sense to most people. So for example, if we had some sort of an effect that did something for each cat we controlled, we probably wouldn't expect that effect to count something that started out being a cat but wasn't a creature anymore. Or if we had something that asked us how many forests we controlled, most people instinctively think that that means forest lands. And so they would not want to count something that was a forest land and now it isn't a land anymore because it lost that type somehow. So everything went great up until we got to the point where Lorwyn happened. And that was the first point where we actually wanted to have stuff that wasn't a creature have a creature type. And I know that Future Sight was actually the first time when tribals got introduced, but that was kind of Future Sight's whole deal, was previewing mechanics from future sets. So Lorwyn was actually the first set that had a thematic and limited environment-based reason why we wanted to have stuff that wasn't a creature have creature types. And hey, that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, Bitter Blossom is a fairy, so it should count for stuff that looks for fairies. Of course, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the context of what we were just talking about. You can't have a card subtype if you don't have an associated card type. And that's the entire problem that tribals were intended to solve. So with that new technology, we're doing great. We can put any creature type on anything as long as we also make it into a tribal. And it works perfectly and fits within the framework of the rules. So why could we not make tribal be a super type? Well, it doesn't work out nearly as well as having tribal be a card type does from a rules perspective. Of course, there's no problem at all with having rules baggage associated with having a super type. Of course, legendary and basic are examples of super types that do have rules baggage associated with them. So there's no problem per se with making a super type like tribal and saying this super type has some special rules going on that makes it possible for anything that has this super type to have a creature type. Now, that works pretty well when I'm just describing it like that, but if you try to put that into precise stuff like you would want to have in the comprehensive rules, that's where you come up with a little bit of an issue. Turns out there's not really a great way to put language like that into the comprehensive rules in such a way that it makes sense with effects that cause you to A, lose card types, or B, change your card types. Wizards tried a lot of different possibilities, but they couldn't come up with a single way to write this in a way that worked functionally and also made sense to people intuitively for all the different kinds of scenarios that they could come up with. And so they went with the easier solution, which was to just make a new card type, tribal, and make that new card type have all the same card subtypes as what the creatures had, and then you could just put tribal on the cards. The structure and the rules that were needed in order to make that function already existed and would function perfectly well within the comprehensive rules with minimal updates, and so that was the cleanest way, at least from a rules perspective, to introduce this functionality to the game. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Did you like this new kind of content where I talk about the why or the how that something works instead of just talking about one specific interaction? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. But until then, I hope you have a great day.